Hello, you've arrived at the Mental Health and Eating Disorder Podcast, helping you hold hope by capturing stories and inspiring recovery. Today's topic is engaging with peers, aka making friendships in treatment settings. My guest is Samsung, who has several years of mental health and eating disorder recovery. She reflects on her experience where these kind of friendships proved both beneficial and hurtful. She offers insight on boundaries, communication, and inevitably how to trust your family or community and your treatment team to support your recovery. I am continuously amazed by her overall recovery and here with her perspective and candidness. Okay, so we are here with Samsung. This name is important to us behind the scenes, and no one will know why that's funny, but we're going to let it be funny to us. And we're talking about a topic that I don't think I've talked about before, which is how to handle relationships that you make while in treatment or in a treatment center. And Samsung has been willing to come and talk about her long experience with this. Welcome.
Hi.
Just to get started, I know we could talk about this for an entire hour, but can you just tell me a little bit about kind of the places you've been over time, if it's possible? Like, where have you been?
Okay, so I started out just like with a one-on-one therapist, and then eventually I went to a PHP, so it was an adolescent PHP. It's a partial hospitalization program, so it was about an 8-hour program every single day. At one point I went to residential setting, which is like a full-time, you're there all day with the same people, and then I've gone to inpatient in hospital, and then those different kind of facilities.
For how long? What's the time span?
So I would say the different bouncing in and out of facilities and different forms of treatment were probably over a span of 4 years.
4 years where you were getting active treatment in different settings.
Yeah, and it was very consistent. Like as soon as it was one place, then the next place happened. Like it was just one after the next after the next.
And how many places you bounced in and out of?
Yeah, there were quite a few.
There were a lot. Just in our time together, there were a lot. So your experience is coming here probably from different settings, from what you do when you're in residential and who you engage with to, like you mentioned, the PHP, IOP, the whole
Correct.
thing. When you first started, if you can remember back, what did they tell you in these settings about whether or not you were supposed to engage or make friends with people during treatment? And then I guess that also leads to after treatment. Did they give you kind of protocols and rules?
I would say that for like a general one-on-one therapist, it's usually pretty hush-hush, I guess. And they kind of say, you know, like, we're here to help you. And it's not really so much about other people because you don't get to interact with your therapist's other clients. However, when I went to PHP, which was my first setting or treatment setting, I guess, they definitely gave us a strong no that you're not allowed to be, you know, talking to people outside of programming. You're not allowed to exchange phone numbers or emails or any sort of contact information. And they just kind of made it very strong point saying that it can be helpful. And at the same time, it's usually pretty much more detrimental than it is helpful to you. So that was definitely pushed on us a lot at PHP. And then once it came to residential, they kind of just knew that we were going to exchange phone numbers. And, you know, there was so much time throughout the day to do it that they weren't going to stop us. But it was definitely something that was not encouraged.
Well, I think with residential, you're living with somebody for a period of time, potentially even as a roommate. How do you not form relationships?
Yeah.
Do they feel kind of organic at that point?
I mean, like, there's just no way. You have such a close connection. At least I feel like a lot of people have that sort of connection with others. You know, you're living with them. You're going through constant everyday battles. Every single meal is obviously, you know, its own war in itself. And you're going through that with somebody. How can you not connect to them?
Yeah, it's like you're in crisis, so you become closer just because of that.
Exactly.
Alone. What about when you're in the setting and you're having a friend or you're choosing someone to hang out with? Is that okay to like form a friendship while you're there? Do they try to avoid that, or are you allowed to have those kind of fraternal moments?
So I would say for the most part, they definitely let that. There are times when you have toxic relationships. I know for myself personally, I had someone that I was really good friends with in treatment. And at one point when I was struggling, I noticed that they sort of stopped hanging around me. And then at one point I noticed that they were not near me at all, and they would specifically be at different tables, and finally asked them about it, and they said, the staff isn't letting me sit with you because when you're engaging in different things that are not helpful to my recovery, they've noticed that I tend to engage in them too.
Interesting. So in that case, the staff intervened because something in the relationship wasn't going to push the treatment on. It was going to get in the way.
Right.
I don't think I knew about that, where they come in and say,
you
two can't sit next to each other. I guess if you think about it in school, that would kind of happen, where when you're interrupting some kid, they're like, you can't sit next to your friend because you two can't learn.
Yeah. And honestly, it was really hard. And I think it was hard for both of us, probably more me for them. But at the end of the day, like, it makes sense. If you're making someone else's recovery more difficult, then it's important that someone steps in and says, like, hey, this can't happen.
Did the staff say something to you or just the other person? Because this could also make you feel some kind of way when someone's like, hey, you're triggering somebody.
So the staff definitely didn't say anything to me. And I honestly thought that they were just kind of, switching things up and changing people's seats. And after a while, I noticed that it wasn't really anyone else. It was just the two of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of went over and I spoke with that person. I was like, hey, is something going on? And even at that point, they were kind of avoiding me in general. It wasn't just at meals. And they explained to me that that was what was going on.
And so as far as you knew, the staff had dictated that. They
Yeah.
had made that happen. But they didn't come to you ahead of time and say, hey, we're going to make a little separation.
Yeah, no, that would have been really hard for me to hear.
Yes. Even afterwards, having your friend tell you that.
Yeah, no, I definitely cried.
Okay. Well, because you're forming these relationships maybe quickly, and yet they're all you have in that place, when they get threatened, I almost feel like it'd be worse.
Yeah.
You're already vulnerable. You have this one person that you're connecting with, and then it's messed up again by whatever you're there for.
Definitely makes it hard. Relationships with people in treatment are definitely like a way, I guess, for you to really grow. It really gives you some sort of a support because you are leaving your family, especially in like a residential or inpatient setting when you don't have your family there around you to support you, you're making other supports. So when you have that taken away from you, or when you know that you're, I guess, like not the bad one in the relationship, but you're the one that's being harmful at that time, then it gets really hard and it hurts you. And then you're already hurting in so many other ways that once you're hurting in this way, it's so much.
It is so much. And you said you might feel like you're the one who's harmful, but it may not be because of your stuff. It's just the alignment with the other person.
Yeah.
So there's so many different dynamics here going on.
Yeah, definitely.
When I planned this conversation, I was mainly thinking about what's going to happen after the fact and how does it get complicated and how do you support each other? But just being there is complicated.
Yeah.
And you're forced to do something that sometimes is a red flag, which is get to know someone very quickly, very intimately, without a lot of boundaries and preparation. Like out in the real world, there'd be natural things to separate you at times.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're there together all day, every day, especially if you have the same room. You sleep in the same room as them. You get up, you have the same, just everything. Your whole routine is the exact same.
Yeah. So you can't really get separation to even think about this relationship either because it's right there the whole time.
And it makes it really difficult.
Does. Well, and that's just why we say that residential and partial hospitalization, these programs, they're not perfect because they create an environment itself that can be difficult.
Yeah. And then it's hard also. I feel like sometimes people become kind of cliquey in treatment. When you go in and you have people with their groups of friends already made, it's sometimes hard to find your way in there, I guess. Mm-hmm. And that's already its own challenge in itself. Like you're going and you're having to fight your eating disorder and overcome all that and deal with new therapists and new team and everything. And then it's also like that whole social aspect of it, because there really is a big part of that, but people don't really realize.
No, it's like, who do I sit with? Who are my people? Who do I go to? And you're saying you don't always know, and they may already be connected. And
yeah,
they may also have stuff going on that may or may not make them open to letting it be inclusive. My goodness, this already sounds like a lot. And we haven't even gotten to the after effects, if you will. So when you're there, it's usually not encouraged to connect information, but it is sort of this quiet in the background. We know about it. I have heard, and you haven't been anywhere recently, but I have heard that the trend has changed a little bit to almost trying to support these relationships because they know they're going to happen. Did you see any of that when you were getting care? Because that was many years ago. It's been a while for you.
Yeah, it's been maybe 4 years.
Yeah.
Probably around close to 4 years.
So proud of you. Sorry. Just had a little side note there. Roll your eyes at me. I love it. I wish this was on video.
Honestly, don't think there was any encouraging of that. It was like an understanding that it's gonna happen. In PHP, that was definitely tried to be stopped. Like they really didn't let us exchange even just like paper and stuff because they didn't want us writing our information on it. And they were very careful of what was going on.
But you, of course, find ways around it.
Like, obviously, we're going to make it happen.
Yeah. But you never saw the trend where it was like, this might be good. Maybe we can help teach people how to have these relationships.
Yeah, no, definitely not a thing.
And I do think that is a little bit of a trend in some settings, not in all, where they're like, let's help you learn boundaries. And how do you know if it's a healthy attachment? That wasn't happening, like you're saying, when you were there. Did you take relationships outside of treatment with you? Did any of them follow you after you were done?
Definitely.
They did.
I have some even to this day that I still, from my first place from 2018, I have some people that I still speak with.
Wow.
And then I have over the years either gained people or kind of slowly said goodbye to those people. Some people it wasn't so slowly. It was pretty abrupt, but I definitely have had connections outside of treatment.
And you've kept them and you call them friends now, I assume.
Yeah.
How did they become the people that surfaced as long-term friends? Like, what about those relationships meant you could say, I've been friends with this person for 6 years?
So I would definitely say the first place I went to was the PHP program. I think that for me, since it was really my intro to the eating disorder world, I think those relationships really stuck with me. Also, I was there for a pretty nice amount of time. And then at one point when I went back, some of those same people were still there or had gone back also. So I really just kept seeing them.
And how old were you then? Just to kind of give a frame.
I was around 16.
16, that's right.
15, 16, 17, around.
So a really important time of your life too, and social experiences are so important.
Like I was supposed to be in high school and instead I was hanging out with these people and that was, obviously going to form a bond. So I would definitely say that those are the people that had been in my life longer. At this point, I'm really only speaking with one person. And, we've definitely had conversations over time where I've said, I find that some people in my life can either be triggering or some of my eating disorder friends can be triggering, or that maybe I feel like maybe I'm triggering them. Is there something that's happening to you? Like, I really want to have an honest conversation with you. Can you please let me know? Because I don't want that to be the situation that we're in. And we've just kind of like discussed it. So
it was part of your conversation or topic between each other to discuss this. You were open about it. It wasn't sort of this odd behind the scenes. You were like, hey, are we causing each other trouble?
Yeah, because I've had friends that I've made that we were really detrimental to each other. Something for me personally is I'm afraid to trigger people. Yeah. It's definitely something I've done many, many times, but I always feel really guilty about it because, for me, my eating disorder is not about harming other people. It was about self-harm, like hurting myself. Yeah. And so whenever other people were affected, it was never my intention. And it was always a horrible feeling knowing I'm hurting other people because that was something I really never wanted to do. So I had one friend that she really wanted to connect, and it was actually from that PHP program. And she would text me different times during the day being like, oh, have you eaten yet? But I knew she wasn't asking in a way of like an encouraging way. Like she wasn't asking because she wanted to say like, yeah, I'm going to go eat something too. It was kind of like oh, did you eat? Because I haven't eaten, or, something like that. Mm-hmm. And a couple weeks in, I was like, this is really toxic. And I don't want that if I'm not, being consistent with my recovery, that it's affecting her and that it's encouraging her to not be consistent in her recovery. Mm-hmm. So I kind of just said, this isn't really working.
So you were the one that had to lay down that boundary.
But I never said it straight out to her. We kind of just stopped talking. Mm-hmm. And then she moved away. So that worked out. So that was really good.
So sometimes there are like other relationships where just certain things dissolve the relationship. There's not necessarily a conflict that happens. But in other times, have you had to kind of say, I'm sorry, this isn't working? Has that come up too?
Yeah, it definitely has. There have been people that I've met, not necessarily in treatment, but, throughout my life that kind of after getting to connect with them, we come to that realization like, hey, we both struggled with the same thing. And eating disorders or mental health, things like that have been a really big part of our life. We bond over that, and I find that sometimes it becomes a lot to handle. And I've had times in my life where I really thought that, hey, my recovery is going really well. I've been in recovery for a while and I can totally handle this. I'm totally up for it. And I've, honestly, like genuinely felt that I was ready. And at some point I noticed that these relationships weren't necessarily beneficial to me. And that really, at this point, I'm not in that place where I could be giving somebody else either mental health support, eating disorder support, because it's just, even though I've been behavior free for years at this point, something about having that relationship with someone that's still actively struggling or dealing with even just the thoughts and not necessarily the behaviors, it's just my brain is not there yet. And that's okay. It took me a while to be able to tell myself that it was okay that I couldn't deal with it because I just kept saying like, no, you're fine. It's all good. You've been eating disorder free for so long, you should be able to deal with it. And I don't have to be able to deal with it. I don't have to be ready yet. There's no timeline. And it was important that I said, I need to take a step back.
I appreciate the insight of you being able to say, it's okay if that wasn't where I thought I was. But you bring up something, and I'm glad you did this, that's so important. Sometimes you end up in a bit of a therapy role. It's almost like you want to help so much and you have this experience, and how do you not sometimes try to help too much, I guess, and get too involved in their disorder as opposed to just being a friend? And is there a way to even do it? In this situation, is there a way to be a friend and not somehow go to that place you both share?
I honestly, in the beginning, thought that there was, and it's possible that maybe for some people they can do that. I just don't think for me I'm in that place. I remember something that one of my providers used to say to me whenever I would have any conversation. I feel like, at least in my head, anytime I had a conversation with them, they'd say, oh, I'm not talking to your eating disorder voice. Like, that's not you talking, that's your eating disorder. And I remember it always really upset me because I was like, no, it's me, it's me. And I never really understood that. And then when I had different relationships and I kind of was in that mentor role, I guess you could say, I sort of noticed like a lot of times when different people were talking to me, it was their eating disorder voice and it wasn't them talking. And at some point, it was either I feel like I'm really just talking to an eating disorder voice and that's too much for me to handle, or I noticed that their eating disorder voice was so strong when it did come out that even if it wasn't that voice that was constantly talking, it was so intense when it would that it was just like, I can't handle this. It's too much.
That's a great way to illustrate it is, and anyone who deals with disordered eating or mental health understands how there's almost like the second voice in your head or the second story. And so for you is recognizing when that and I are communicating, I don't have the clout for that. Most therapists don't have the clout for that. Most of us don't want to walk in a room and talk to that voice. And you're saying, I might be ready to be a friend, but I don't know that I'm ready to do that. So this brings me to the next thing. Does it matter what place a person is in treatment? So you mentioned friends from 2018.
Yeah.
If they have followed your path and they are behavior free for years, is it easier, or is it depend on where in recovery they are?
So I think if I had a friend from that long ago that was actively in treatment, it might be, I don't know. So I have one friend specifically that I'm thinking of from 2018, and the two of us have kind of always been in touch, I guess. We never really lost touch. And it's not really like long conversations on the phone. It's really just like a text here and there. And, you know, they've been in and out of college. At one point, they had to leave college and go to residential treatment. And I just remember thinking, like, I wish I could visit them. I wish I could see them. And it was never like a let me go trigger myself, because I feel like that's something people with eating disorders sometimes do. We kind of are like, oh yeah, I shouldn't do that, and that would really not be good for me, but I'm going to do it anyway. So it was never something like that for me. And I know that that relationship with her was always a positive one. We always encourage each other. Like, even when we were both actively struggling, we would still encourage each other. Or if I was struggling, she would encourage me. And I knew even if she was struggling and she was saying like, oh yeah, you can do it, you can do it, and I was like, bro, you're literally not doing it, I knew that it wasn't her that was struggling, that was her eating disorder, and that her as a person was the one that was encouraging me. So we were still able to have that for each other.
Yeah. And
I think that was a really big part, because I knew her as a person also. And I knew that her encouragement was always genuine and her struggle was not my struggle. And when I do text her and I say like, hey, how's it going? And she'll say, oh, I'm really struggling right now, I will ask her, I'll say like, have you eaten today? Have you done different things? But I won't text her the next, 10 weeks every single day. I'm like, oh, did you eat? Did you eat? It'll be like a once in a couple of weeks thing, like, hey, how are you doing? But it's not me checking up, me being her therapist.
Which even someone who maybe didn't have your history of disordered eating would maybe ask.
Yeah.
Like a friend who knows would say, hey, did you eat? And that would be appropriate.
And I also know that that's not triggering to her, I guess. I know that it's not going to upset her, that she's going to get mad. Why are you asking me that? I know she knows that I'm asking it from a genuine place.
So this comes from just having the history of each other, knowing that you're authentic.
Yeah.
And also maybe ahead of time, do you ever set those boundaries that we're not going to talk about these things? Or do you say to someone, do you mind if I say this as your friend who gets it?
Yeah, I've definitely asked her that before, like more towards the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually interesting because in that place, obviously they were very strong against no communication with each other. And her parents actually were even stronger than the facility was.
Oh,
and
wow.
I remember getting her phone number was so complicated and so intense and confusing, and it was so hard. I care about her, and I don't know, it was a lot of work, and I don't know if I want to be dealing with someone else's eating disorder. And as horrible as that sounds, I was a kid, but I'm so grateful because she's been able to support me. Mm-hmm. And I've been able to support her.
And you were saying initially her parents didn't want you two to engage.
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother layer here. Sometimes the family feels like that may not be a good connection.
Yeah.
Because that's what they're told also.
Yeah, no, for sure. I had a friend actually, same PHP place. Mm-hmm. When I met her, she was about 11 years old. Mm-hmm. And I was either 15 or 16 at that time. And I remember we developed a really, really strong relationship. And she had the most incredible personality. She was the friendliest, just most incredible kind of little girl, I guess. 11's pretty little. And I found out that she lived pretty close by. And her parents were actually really supportive of her being friends with people outside of treatment, which was pretty new to me because no one really had that. And I remember we used to hang out sometimes, and she had a sister. We would all kind of just hang out together. And we would be there to support each other. And as silly as it sounds, she was really a big support for me. She was just someone that was kind of like a little sister to me, which I've never had. And so it was always like that little encouragement in the back of my head being like, no, like you have someone looking up to you. You have someone that's waiting for you. And I remember whenever I would struggle, I never wanted to tell her because I didn't want to show her that someone older than her is struggling.
Yeah.
And at some point, obviously, that wasn't realistic. And if I would end up in the hospital and she couldn't speak to me for a couple weeks, she would know like something's going on. And then whenever she was struggling, I was always really active in trying to help her. And there was at one point, you know, a couple years after 2018 that she started having a really, really hard time. And she ended up inpatient. She came home with an NG tube and was just like really in a bad place. It got to the point that she had to be taken back to inpatient, and they said like she can't even come home. She needs to go to residential. And I remember she texted me and she's like, oh my God, I'm going to residential. What do I do? What do I need to know? And I was just kind of giving her as much advice as I could. And I said, you know, are we able to speak while you're there? And she said, no, they only let me talk to family. And I remember that was really hard. And I was like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to communicate with the sister or the mother or somebody to see what's going on. And she was there for a really long time. And at first, when I would text her sister would respond. And slowly, you know, after the weeks were going by, her sister kind of stopped responding. Yeah. And I started getting a little bit concerned. And at one point, I remember I called the mother. She didn't answer. And I called the sister and she answered. And she finally was like, she's really not doing well. You know, I have nothing more to say. And a couple weeks later, I got a text from the mom saying, you know, I noticed that you're really trying to keep in touch and you're trying to check on her. And we really appreciate that. And it's really kind of you. And at this point, we think that it's important that you take a step back. And, you know, we've talked about it with the treatment team and hopefully she's going to be coming home in a little while. And we just don't want you to communicate with her at all. We think that it's better if she doesn't have any sort of connection to her treatment friends. And we kind of want to separate that part of her life. And we don't want her go through any of that. And so she said, you know, maybe when you guys are both in recovery for a good couple of years, maybe you can see then and get back in touch. And I remember I was currently not in the best place. Right. And then after hearing that, I was really, really not okay because here was this person that I had such a strong, intense relationship with that wasn't just purely eating disorder. And suddenly that whole relationship was gone. And it was one of the most horrible experiences for me having to say goodbye to this. And it was also that I wasn't able to talk to her and say goodbye, that I kind of felt like I was losing a sibling.
Yeah.
I would say for the most part, I was hurt. And then a part of me was kind of like upset, you know, maybe she doesn't want to stop talking to me. Maybe it's just her mom,
You're guessing and all your pain.
I had no idea. And I was like, okay, I'm going to reach out to her anyway and see because I need to know. And so I had texted her and I knew she wasn't going to respond because she didn't have her phone. And at some point, a while later, she still hadn't responded and I actually bumped into her somewhere.
Oh, wow.
And that was really weird because like I didn't even know she had gotten home. So she texted me as if nothing had ever happened. And at one point, I was asking her something about her recovery and how it was going. And she's like, oh, I don't think we should talk. And so I was really hurt again. And I kind of had set myself up for that. Like I really should have just kind of left it alone. And, you know, now at this point in my life, if something like that were to happen, it's a boundary that I think is important to respect. Anytime anyone sets a boundary, it's important to respect it. I think it was just too much for me at that time to just say like, okay, I'm going to leave it alone.
Because you were in your own recovery space. Boundaries were hard.
Exactly. And so I left her alone for a while. And then I would say probably 2 years after that, I sort of saw her name pop up on my Instagram. And I was like, okay, it's been a really long time. I just need to know how she is. I remember I had texted her and she sort of only half responded, like a word here and there. And I texted her and I straight out and I was like, I noticed that you're not really responding to me. Can you please just be completely honest with me? Do you not want me to text you? And she texted me back and she said, you know, at this point in my life, I am in recovery and I've been in recovery for some time now. And I feel like for me, moving on means not necessarily maintaining those relationships that I had. And for me, that was a huge thing, for me to hear because it didn't just apply for her. I feel like I applied it for a lot of other people after that. But also hearing her say that, it was like a way for me to be like, okay, I really respect you and I respect that decision. And I really hope that you continue to do well. And I'm really proud of you. And so that was the last time we spoke.
And she almost universalized it a little bit, that it wasn't about you. You were like a symbol of the things that represented the treatment to her, which was so painful. And you were a reminder, perhaps. It wasn't that you specifically were the wrong person. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time in a way.
Yeah, it's time for both of us to move on.
So if you do decide to engage in a relationship with someone, it is a bit at risk. It's almost like online dating where you just don't know until you sit down at the coffee shop and you put yourself out there, but you have to almost go in knowing that it may not work just because we met in this setting, not because we're not two great people. Something that I don't like that I think comes out of this that is hard to hear is there's a lot of shaming that's built into some of these relationships. Like you were told a couple of times by individuals, don't come around, basically. And so it also sets you up when you're already in a vulnerable position to self-judge. What a hard thing to deal with when you're trying to help. You're in your own recovery, and now somebody you care about is disconnecting you.
Yeah. And I think that's why at the end of the day, they don't encourage relationships, because I think that as much good comes out of it, there are so many times that it doesn't end well. But realistically speaking, it's totally possible, and it has happened with me. And, the friendships that I had that were good or are good, they're really great, and they're a staple in my life. And at the same time, those other ones were not worth it. I would say at the end of the day, it's not something that I would encourage.
Okay. So if you met however many people and made however many relationships, you're saying to this day, only one, maybe two were able to survive.
Yeah. Only one at this point.
Only
honestly.
one at this point. So that is a lot of pain,
Yeah.
a lot of changes, a lot of boundaries, a lot of energy. But I guess you could argue, did some of those relationships while they were happening help you on your recovery path, though, even though they're no longer
Definitely.
part of your life?
I would definitely say so. Whether it was before I was going into a new treatment facility, I would text different people and say, like, I'm really nervous, or I don't know what to do. Or while I was actively struggling, I had some people that would reach out to me and they would give me support, whether I was like currently struggling with not engaging in a behavior or just in general struggling. So it was definitely like a good thing in my life. I don't know if it's worth it.
And you weren't prepared probably for them not being sustainable.
Right.
You didn't have, I don't know what we call it, the education, the training, the awareness.
Yeah.
These could be really helpful, but don't expect them to all survive. And it's almost like you probably didn't know that enough to be prepared for when they broke up.
There are different groups where people say it's important to be part of a support group. And there are times where it is. And at the same time, let's say you're part of a support group and people are in remission and everyone's doing okay and it's all great until someone isn't in remission and they're struggling and maybe somebody dies and it's really, really hard. And suddenly it's not the best thing to be part of that support group because it's detrimental to your journey and your recovery.
It's a great example. And it's too unpredictable. You don't know.
Right.
I actually like that you said it there because it really made me think in the medical world, we tend to be a little more sober about how we look at things. But when it comes to mental health, we forget. Very similar.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to recover when you're watching other people kind of free falling sometimes.
Yeah.
So you're saying they've been valuable. There's some really important people in my life. I didn't want to lose them. And maybe I wouldn't have done the relationship to begin with for some of them.
Yeah.
If you knew it was going to be so hurtful.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I could have not, because I know at the time that was what I needed to do to survive. I needed those relationships and I needed to be able to connect with people because at the end of the day, as much as your parents are around or whoever your caregiver is, they don't get what you're going through. And having someone that actually understands it and not just is like, oh yeah, that sounds really hard. Someone that's like, it is hard. It like really, really, really sucks. There's nothing compared to that. There's nothing, that you can say to a person that's struggling with an eating disorder if you don't actually understand it or you haven't actually gone through it, that will mean the same to them as someone else that has struggled with that same thing.
Ooh, I like it. So lived experience.
Yeah.
Someone who's lived it, knows it, gets it. What do you suggest, or do you have a suggestion of how we can help people have these relationships but be more aware of them or careful? Because they do sound important. Like you said, I need someone who gets it. Or what would you have wanted someone maybe to tell you back then to help you be more prepared for what you saw?
I don't know if anyone could have told me anything at that point that would have changed my mind because I felt like I was in a place where I was like, oh yeah, I know better than them, or like they don't really know what they're saying. I don't know, recently having thought that I was ready to be able to be a friend to somebody else that was struggling and then realizing that I wasn't in that place. It's hard for me to say.
Is it more like a personal insight where you just have to really be able to understand where you're at, maybe talk with your own care team about whether or not you're ready? Maybe it has to be an open conversation.
Yeah, I think so. I think also you have to be really in tune to yourself. And if you notice any sort of negative consequences coming from it, that's when you have to be like, okay, either take a step back or talk to your care team or your therapist or somebody.
So kind of knowing yourself, working with the team, and then trying to do something right away when you notice it. So you're not bringing more emotion and more relationship in if it's not going to work at that time. Yeah.
It's also really important that you don't blame yourself for not being ready and that you don't make the other person on the other end feel as though it's their fault, because it's not their fault that they're causing you to have these thoughts or even, if you engage in behaviors. And it's important that if you do have to end that relationship, that you really tell them it's just that you need to take care of yourself.
Yeah, true story. It's just you're not a good match at that time in your life.
Yeah.
it's not a good fit. Kind of back to the online dating, just because there could be two wonderful humans who just aren't good in a dating setting. Well, you and I talked about this before. Peer support is this beautiful intervention where someone with lived experience, like yourself, mentors somebody else who's on a recovery path. And you and I might have talked about where you were at, because it has been several years without behaviors. However, you're saying just because someone's had this 2 years, that's usually the criteria. Yeah. You're saying it doesn't mean we're ready. And how will you know when you're ready? Because I think you'd be a great peer support down the road.
Thank you.
I do. You have the lived experience. You have so much different experience. You have come so far. When will you know? And maybe for other people out there thinking about helping a friend or being a peer supporter, I mean, what will you know that's different from what you thought you knew recently with this friend?
Well, I think that's already what you just said, what you knew from your friend. I think that's a really big part of it, because I don't personally feel as though being a peer support for a friend is a good idea.
True. Yeah, I agree with you there.
Right. I don't think...
Neutral person.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I've had people throughout my life that have been peer supports for me, but it was never a friendship. And it was never, introduced as like, oh, here's this person, they want to be your friend. Oh, and they're also aware of what's going on, that they want to help you. It was always like, this is somebody that used to struggle with an eating disorder, and they'd like to be able to be a support for you.
Because there are boundaries with peer support, but they're also set up to just be your peer support.
Exactly.
And if you become friendly, that's fine.
Right. But I think that was a really big difference for me. And I think that's a big difference for people in general that want to go into peer support, that it's not a friendship. I think you have to have those boundaries, and the whole friendship thing, it doesn't work. Yeah. You can't be a peer support as a friend.
Agreed. Just like you can't be friends with people you do therapy with and stuff. It wouldn't work. So then you might actually be in a position soon to be like a peer supporter, because you really do have all of the pieces. It's just that when there's an emotional connection, it gets way too complicated.
Right. Yeah.
Screening ahead of time, right?
Exactly.
And if people do peer support, you do have supervision to help you with those boundaries that you didn't have anyone to help you with these friendships. You were kind of winging it. There's no handbook.
Exactly.
There's no direction. I mean, we talked about some of these and you were very open, but by then they were already there. They were already friendships that were built out of necessities. I guess going kind of to our last couple questions here, what's a piece of advice for somebody else out there in a treatment setting or in some kind of setting who is engaging in relationships? Any one piece of advice that you think would be the most helpful for them?
My advice is utilize the supports that are being offered to you, especially I would say family. There's a lot of time where I feel like people get upset at their family or feel like, their family's at fault or their family makes it worse. And reality is that the family wants to be there for you. I know when I first started my recovery journey, I was like, absolutely not. This is not happening. And at some point, I kind of realized that my family is my best support. And they're the people that I'm around. And if I'm struggling, I can go to them and I can say, I'm having a hard time. Can you sit with me? Or I'm having a difficult day. Can you just distract me? Can we go do something? Or can we just, have a conversation about something totally silly and mindless? But I would definitely say utilize your family, utilize your other supports. Obviously, your therapist isn't there to be your best friend and talk on the phone with all day, every day. Surprise. I learned that the hard way.
Not with me, right? I don't remember you wanting to be my best friend.
I mean, you set pretty clear boundaries right away.
Yeah.
But I would definitely, that would be my suggestion.
That's beautiful advice. And what you're saying is there's a lot of places to get support.
Yeah. Also, I mean, obviously you have to set boundaries. Like if your family is constantly triggering you, you have to say like, hey, this is not helpful to me, because they're not going to know otherwise. But if you're able to form a way of open communication, even if it means involving your therapist for help, having them as like a go-between just to help set that stage for what that's going to look like. I think that's going to be so, so beneficial, either in the moment or just later on in life. It also really helps you have a strong family connection outside of eating disorder stuff.
Yeah, you build something new out of the disorder. There's another benefit.
Yeah.
And I like that you said, again, it's about communicating, being open and setting boundaries. And it gets true in every relationship, but certainly in these, because they're higher stakes.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more going on. I asked you this years ago on a podcast. I don't know what your answer was, so now I got to go back and listen. But if you could pick one word or two to describe your recovery journey now, because now we're years later.
Yeah.
What would you say?
I actually remember, I thought about this before, what my old word was. Today's a very different word.
I'm not surprised. Yeah.
I think that the word that I would use to describe my eating disorder journey would be painful, because it really hurt. And it was horrible. It was one of the worst things I've ever had to go through. And what you don't realize is that it's not necessarily just about refeeding or stopping behaviors. It's also about learning to find out who you are and discovering that you're not just an eating disorder and that identity that defined you for years. And so for me, that was so much longer than just my recovery journey.
Oh, yes.
And
I'm like flailing my arms over here because you're like, you have to find out who you are. How many times were we like, you don't know who you are yet?
right.
You're on this beautiful journey late in life to figure out who you are.
Even at this point, I'm working on it.
It's fine.
But I mean, growing up with an eating disorder from such a young age, I was around 8 when it started. I have no idea. Anything about me, I feel like, can come back to the eating disorder. And so I'm having to figure all of that out now. And it's really hard and it hurts and it's not fun.
Is it a little different now? The last 4 years, behavior free, has it had a different vibe to it? Is there anything about it that has softened for you?
I think that when I am struggling, it's not nearly as intense. I know that I can get through it. I know like in the moment it's hard and it sucks, but it will pass.
Something you didn't know 4 years ago.
Like it didn't seem like it was going to ever end. And now I know like, okay, you've done this and you're going to keep doing that. And I will let myself feel the feelings.
So there's sort of a resilience or maybe even a faith that or trust that wasn't there until you started kicking it down time and time again. And you're living your life now. It's not in charge of what you're doing today.
Exactly. I don't let it dictate it. That's another thing. Like I've had times where I've even entertained the thought of like going back because, realistically eating disorders do provide some sort of something for a person. It's hard and it's not going to stop being hard for probably, a nice amount of time longer.
Well, especially for you, because you started so young. You're only how old now?
Basically 22.
Basically 22.
Basically 22.
22 years old. And you started at 8 and you've only really had 4 years of behavior-free recovery, 2 of which were more independent. You weren't even getting a lot of care. Right. So you're still really new based on how much of your life was
for sure.
Was painted by this. So it's pretty impressive that you found your own feet and you're doing it. But you're not kidding anybody. You're like, it's hard.
Yeah. And I have support. I have my people.
Yeah.
So as nice as it is to have people that do understand and have gone through it with you, like having like eating disorder friends, your team's also gone through it with you and they can be that support for you.
So like your family, they may not have an eating disorder, but man, do they know it from sitting with you day after day, right?
Yeah. I definitely could not have done this by myself. Absolutely not. Like the days that I'm really struggling and I have to reach out to support, and they know that this is normal. Yeah. And they're not going to, send out the red flags and put on some sirens and whatever. They're going to just be there to do what
you already did. You know what you already did, just do it again and keep doing it. Well, I think you offered a lot of really good insight on a tough topic. And it's not black and white.
No, it's not.
But at least you gave some guidance of how to approach it a little more carefully for people who are engaging in these relationships and understand the risk factor, because there is a risk factor involved. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your time and your insight, and hopefully other people will hear this and have a better path to take in this.
I hope so.
Thank you for exploring hope today on the Mental Health and Eating Disorder podcast.